To look at what lies ahead, we're joined now by my colleague in New York, Sean Bryce Pease, here in Johannesburg, Eusebius Makaiza, who is an author and political analyst. Thanks for your time, and to you too, Eve Fairbanks, American journalist and author. Perhaps let me just start with you, Eusebius. So it's been said that Joe Biden's real COVID-19 challenge is restoring the nation's trust in science, and that this is the biggest battle that he'll have beyond restoring trust in general. What do you see happening over the next few days and even weeks?
Good evening, Tapiso, and to the viewers of SABC. I think that there are two ways in which we can frame the challenge in the days and weeks and months ahead. America has got to think of its place in the world. That is challenge one. And then the second challenge for the president is to think about what to do domestically to try and reach out to those from the other side of the aisle that have ideological differences with the Democrats about how to problem solve a range of issues, from deep issues within the economy, healthcare, questions around, for example, the agenda when it comes to green rights and whether or not the USA should think very carefully about whether it wants to rejoin, for example, the Paris Agreement. So for me, those are the two challenges. And then I would just add one more thing, and we can get into the details a little bit later, is that while those are, in a sense, the medium-term challenges, in the immediate couple of days, I think that Joe Biden faces a challenge that the media hasn't really given detail to, which is that it will take about 2 months or so before he's actually president of the USA. And in the meantime, you have on a daily basis, as we speak, 100,000 plus Americans being infected with COVID-19. And Donald Trump is still the president as we speak. So there's a governance challenge right now that he has to deal with. And then later on, he has to think about America in the world, and then about the deep divisions domestically within the USA.
And perhaps let me just stay with you, Eusebius, and ask this question. Is it problematic that Joe Biden didn't win by a landslide? Does it speak volumes to his inability to present not only a cogent but convincing alternative?
You know, I think soul-searching needs to happen for the Democratic Party in the weeks and months ahead. They squandered the opportunity for self-examination after 2016 already, Tsepiso, because you've got to ask yourself, why would some 71 million folks not want to reject unambiguously a racist, a xenophobe, a misogynist, an anti-scientific, anti-intellectual, illiberal president? One of the worst, if not the worst, American president in history. And there you can't just say that 71 million voters themselves are racist and bigots. You've got to ask yourself, as the Democratic Party, what did you not offer? What was it about the way in which you failed to engage those conservatives who aren't bigots, but simply didn't find your message as one to be coherent and appealing for the everyday issues that they care about, as working class white Americans, for example, who might feel on the margins of society? So there will be enormous difficulty, even for someone of a moderate political posture like Joe Biden, to really reach out to the millions of Americans that see the issues fundamentally different to himself. But it's not an intractable problem. It can be handled.
And Sherwin, we'll come back to you in just a moment about the demographics, who voted for what, because there's some say it's a misnomer that Trump didn't get strategic votes. But I want to start with you, Eve, and ask this question. You tweeted something saying that we should stop talking about what you say is the long lost national dream, but you also say that there are people who still believe that without Trump there is no GOP, that they wouldn't want to vote for the Republicans. Why is it? Are we saying that Trumpism has not self-destructed? Eve, do we still have you on the line?
Yeah, can you hear?
Okay, now we can hear you. So you can go ahead.
All right, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Hi, nice to talk to you. I am struck that Biden won by quite a lot, and it might not seem that way, but historically speaking in the U.S., being an incumbent, meaning a a person who's already in office has a huge advantage. I think I wrote a little bit about this, and we've had 21 presidents who've won a second term, and I believe all but 4 of them have substantially improved their vote margin. In other words, they won by a lot more the second time. And so there are a lot of ways in which I actually think this was a substantial repudiation of Trump. That said, the phrase, our long national nightmare is over, comes from the era of Richard Nixon in the U.S., which is what his successor said when he resigned from office after corruption scandals. And, you know, there's always a reason that a figure like, let's say, Nixon, or in this case, Trump, was able to take power, was able to gain so many votes in the first place, was able to achieve that high office. And that doesn't go away as soon as the person is kicked out. So I would say, you know, there's going to be a lot of work to do, as Eusebius says exactly. I would just add that there's a feeling that, you know, I think some people here in South Africa are familiar with in different contexts, which is the sense of, in various contexts, having reached out to another side, to a group of political adversaries or people who seem to not be, you know, wanting the best for you politically, reaching out to them over and over and not really getting a lot in return. And that is the feeling of Democrats in the U.S. right now, which is that I remember we were told under Bush that there had to be, which was elected in 2000, George W. Bush, a lot of soul-searching and reckoning and empathizing with American conservatives who are now a minority in the votes. I mean, the vote margin that Biden won by was a lot. Also, you know, when in 2016, we have to do soul-searching, we have to reach out, and that may or may not be true, but there are a lot of Americans on the left or Democrats who are kind of tired of making overtures. So, you know, that leaves a different kind of situation where a sort of healing, empathizing, unifying, it's going to be difficult for that to happen in a straightforward way, I think.
Sharon, I want to look at some of what Eusebius and Eva are just raising, the figures that voted for Trump, the demographics. There's an argument that the Black, Latino, Guatemalan and Puerto Rican voters actually voted for him, that the only demographics that weren't with him were white men, that he held his vote with white women. Is that being reflected at the polls, the tally that's coming out, because there is a breakdown?
I just want to touch on, Tsepiso, if you'll allow me, just kind of the discussion that our two guests were having about, you know, why people voted for Trump in this election. And I think one element is to understand that Americans consume their news in silos in this country. And when you consume only Fox News or only Breitbart News, you know, news websites that affirm your worldview, you're not actually hearing from the other side. You have media personalities. I don't want to call them journalists. These are opinion newsmakers, your Tucker Carlsons, your Sean Hannitys. They have a certain perspective that indulges a specific point of view. And if you're tuning into just Fox every day, that is the point of view you're going to get. Climate change is a hoax. We have to drill more, drill, baby, drill. And if you tune into MSNBC or CNN, you'll talk more about the science around climate change and the impacts and the need for green jobs and perhaps the understanding what you mean when you talk about the Green New Deal. And so it's these silos that are very problematic in a country that affirms the First Amendment, the right to say just about anything, no matter what the consequences might be. And so that is, I think, very destructive to why we find ourselves in this very partisan divide where the facts no longer matter. One of the first things Kellyanne Conway said when they won the White House is that we have a thing called alternative facts. I mean, what on earth is that? And that has resonated here, right? I mean, we see it every day in in the conversations we have on news media. The other thing we're not really talking about is how the Democrats here have been able to change the electoral map. Maybe it wasn't as big a blue wave as we might have thought, but we're talking about Arizona and Georgia, two states that have not voted for a Democrat since 1996 in the case of Arizona and 1992 in the case of Georgia. And they look like they're going to hold on to those states. The final numbers are not in, but Biden has the lead. There might be a recount in Georgia, but the AP and Fox News have already given Biden the win in Arizona, those critical 11 electoral college votes. So as much as we're not feeling perhaps it was as big a blue wave as everyone's expected it to be, and certainly what the polls were telling us, erroneously so, there has been a shift in the South. That Sun Belt has now got blue states. There's not a thick red line running through it, in addition to resurrecting the blue wall, the Pennsylvanias, the Wisconsins, and the Michigans. So there's been great success here, despite the split we're seeing in the numbers.
So I think, Sharon, the point is to focus on the road ahead. Yes, there have been triumphs, but there are also challenges ahead, and this is what we're looking at here, to look at what it is that he failed to do to win over voters. Texas or Florida, for instance, there are those questions about those demographics that voted for him. Criticism against him has been he was not so committed to courting the Hispanic voters, that he didn't see them as a pathway to winning. So if he's going to push a progressive agenda, is he going to have to work harder within these demographics, within these counties, within these states?
You're right, but the response is complicated. Joe Biden won the Hispanic vote in this election. And remember, this stuff is anecdotal for now. This is based on exit polling. All the numbers are not in because the elections have not been certified by all the states. That happens in the weeks ahead. But Joe Biden has anecdotally won 30 points, the Hispanic vote by 30 points. The anomaly is in a place like Florida, which you mentioned, where Trump was able to appeal to the Cuban Hispanic vote and the Venezuelan expat community in that territory. You mentioned the Guatemalans as well. Biden winning by 30 nationally, but in Florida, Trump turned that around, 55 to Trump, 42 to Biden. So not a huge majority, but in a smaller context, in the microcosm of Florida really having impact. And you saw that despite the polling, even giving Joe Biden a 3-point edge as we went into Election Day, Trump winning that state by 3 points. And we know they invested a lot in that demographics. A few other anecdotes I have for you is that Trump was actually able to retain the 63% of the broad-based white vote in this country. Hillary Clinton got 32%, Biden 36%, so a 4-point switch, which has played a role here. Trump again gained 8 points since 2016 on the Latino vote, so that was also important. But the black vote, 90%. Trump was able to make slight inroads into the black vote, but the black vote, particularly black women, turning out in their numbers for the Biden-Harris ticket, Tsepiso.
Okay, so I want to talk about then the direction forward. Eusebius, as you've already alluded to, healthcare, for instance. Some have criticized Joe Biden for being more towards the Democratic corporate interest side. If you look at healthcare, they said he seemed to defend the private healthcare institutions a little bit more, that he was dovetailing on conversations around fracking when the left challenged him. Was he a weak candidate in this respect? Are these issues that he and Kamala Harris going to have to brush up on more? I mean, there was a survey done, I think, by Fox News just on what it is that Americans want. And it seems the citizenry is very much behind a lot of what he was projecting, the issue around jobs, around healthcare, the economy. But are there issues where he himself may face criticism over his corporatism?
He will face criticism, Tsepiso, and as Sherwin correctly points out, America is a society that lives in echo chambers, and the great challenge for the president-elect is going to be how it is that he gets different folks politically around the table that have different views, for example, on how to deal with a green agenda or how to deal with the healthcare challenges within the USA, and how he is going to broker agreement where there are deep ideological, policy, economic and other analyses about what the best way forward is I think that is going to be an enormous difficulty. He has projected himself as someone who, as one writer in The Atlantic wonderfully put it, is, neither anti-woke nor woke. He's falling foul of all of these categories that are quite reductive that we like as commentators, as journalists, because it makes it easier to read and to explain politics to our viewers. But Joe Biden, I don't think, is fundamentally married to any one of these solutions, despite what you said and how you framed this question, and that's a good thing. But the difficulty for him is that the folks around the discussion table, literally and figuratively, are ones who are married to their particular positions. And I think the possibility of a logjam is very real, which is also why that runoff on the 5th of January is so crucially important, because having won the presidency is not the only thing that will determine how difficult it will be for him, but also, for example, whether or not they're able to control the Senate.
And I'm glad you say that, Eusebius, because these are the comments from his critics, including the fact that they said, it's all very well and good that he has won the presidency, but they still haven't won the Senate. Yes, Sherwin rightly says that the results are still trickling in. So who is in his corner? We'll put up some tweets, but Eve, what are your thoughts on that? So let's perhaps look at some of the tweets that are coming through, and perhaps you could just talk about whose support would be strategic for him at this point.
Who's behind Biden? In other words, sort of capacitating him.
Yes.
Yeah. He has a ton of support from Democrats themselves. There's a group of conservatives who happens to include my father, who was a Reagan official, a longtime Republican who voted for Biden, would back Biden, Republicans who recoiled from Trump. I did read, though, a phrase that struck me as true, which is that in 2016, Americans really kind of agonized about how to change people's hearts. So in other words, the hearts of people who were attracted to Trump. And now the question is more how to change elements of our system, meaning the electoral system. They've done political science research that suggests that if you ask Americans about their views kind of in a poll that's a little bit separated from, asking them about Trump or contemporary politics, they are not so much more partisan innately or split than the residents of, a place like Spain or something like that. But as others have mentioned, we have a huge problem with our media, that it's basically become two alternate realities that are operating parallel to each other. But we also have an issue with our Constitution, and that's a very, very hard thing for people to face, because there's a huge reverence in the U.S. for our Constitution. It's been around for a long time. We've only amended it, more than 20 times, but that's really not that many. People love the Constitution. People have a printout of it in their pockets at times in the United States. And yet we now have a system whereby regularly, due to elements of this Constitution and how elections are organized constitutionally, you can win while you're losing by a margin of millions of people. So millions more, choose a certain candidate. It would have been easy with a few tweaks for Trump to win the Electoral College this year. But it wouldn't have been easy for him to win the popular vote. He had a huge deficit. And this is sort of becoming more obvious. And so I think people are going to really clamor for Biden to look at constitutional amendment around abolishing the Electoral College. And I think there's a real legitimate reason for that. But those are some high-stakes fixes that we may need to try to make, but they're going to be quite tough.
Sherwin, I want to look at other suggestions that are being made about what he could change. Speaking about COVID-19, you and I spoke about it earlier on, that it's going to be one of his priority areas. And they say that, he can appoint new heads of the government's major health agencies, including that of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Director of the National Institute of Health, the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, as well as the Director for Centers for Disease Control Prevention. Is this likely, and would he be in a position to do that?
Very much so. The president has full authority to appoint members of his cabinet and those senior administration officials, so the head of the FBI, head of Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration. I'm not sure he necessarily wants to change those. Remember, those people in those top positions have essentially been working under a very dark cloud, and that is the name President Donald Trump. And without him there, I think they will have a great deal of more freedom, certainly, to make decisions without having to sort of nod and wink at what the political narrative is as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the political expedience that the president has sought to achieve in terms of this pandemic. But remember, Biden, Tsepiso, is going to have the bully pulpit now, unlike Donald Trump, who will no longer be president. And with that comes a great deal of attention. When the president speaks, everybody listens. And this is a president, the incumbent, that was unable, really, despite the numbers we are seeing in terms of the turnout in this election, really did not reach across the aisle or attempt to bring over people that didn't vote for him in 2016 to expand that base. That base in terms of the polling was stuck at between 40 and 45% and really never moved anywhere close to 50%. Biden has a real opportunity here to reposition the US presidency, to really talk to the need for greater empathy in this country, to really, the proof in the pudding, to reach across the aisle, to work with Mitch McConnell, who is very likely, certainly within the next few months, the next 70 days, to be the leader of the Senate, where they need to now pass a huge stimulus package that has passed the House, some $2.2 trillion in aid that is needed right now. And so here is a good yardstick at which we will be able to measure his ability to reach across the aisle. The president has been unable to get that package through. Now that there's new sentiment and momentum towards the Biden presidency, what sort of momentum can be generated now in terms of delivering for the American people? And so then you are able to see support shift in this country. Is Biden being successful? Is he speaking to me, my economic needs in a state like Idaho and a state like Kentucky, as opposed to just the bastions of Democratic power in California and New York? And that, I think, is going to be the trick. You mentioned that he talked about being a president not just for red states and blue states. Will he be able to deliver on that? That really is going to be the test for Biden.
And you see, it's just, you were talking about the domestic agenda, but looking at the international agenda, from his speech, he sounds like somebody who's ready to embrace all the negativity, aggression, perhaps, that President Donald Trump is thought to have brought onto multilateralism. Just in terms of the relations that he would have to disentangle himself from, who would you say is the first?
Firstly, at the risk of behaving like Donald Trump did in the first presidential debate, I just want to touch on one point unrelated to your excellent question, then I'll come back to this one. I do want to say very plainly that while I agree with the spirit of the excellent remarks from both Eve and also in particular from Sherwin, I really think that we've got to be plain and just call it as it is. America's not a place where you can easily reach consensus just because Joe Biden is a decent guy who isn't an whole as the last president was. The likes of Mitch that Sherwin is talking about can't get it in themselves to even acknowledge that this man is the president-elect. The same with Ted Cruz and many other senior Republicans. So Trumpism is real, but it's a little bit like with the ANC here. We think if you get rid of Jacob Zuma, you don't have a problem. And then lo and behold, you find that the rot runs deep. And the same is true of the Republican Party. All of the intractable differences between these two sides that Eve was talking about, they're not going to go away just because the new president-elect is someone that you can imagine having a nice cold beer with. As for the international fora, I think the most important thing is for this president to demonstrate that he doesn't project the same unilateral arrogance that Donald Trump did when it came to international relations. So when it comes to the role of the United Nations in the World Health Organization, when it comes to regional bodies that try and deal with very specific contemporary problems, such as, for example, the global pandemic, such as what kind of planet are we going to bequeath generations to come, I think Joe Biden has some low-hanging fruit that he can pick internationally that I think will be a little bit easier compared to the domestic, almost intractable differences that we have spoken about. But maybe one of the more difficult international questions will be what should be his attitude and posture towards the state of Israel. We've already seen a couple of people, for example, reminding the international community of Kamala Harris and what their position was on the invasion of Iraq, and dragging us back, because the internet never forgets, to what their positions were on some really tricky international relations questions. But I think in general, restoring America's position in the world may be marginally easier than dealing with some of the domestic stuff.
So just quickly to wrap up, Eve, as Eusebius says, the internet never forgets, and definitely one thing they haven't forgotten is as they say, the threat of prosecution against Donald Trump, the allegations of tax fraud, allegations of sexual assault or rape. Is he now more vulnerable?
I think he's much more vulnerable, and that's a big question. There are a lot of people, a lot of even sort of high-level Democrats, influential people in our parliament and the House of Representatives who do not want to see him not prosecuted for legitimate tax fraud, tax crimes, other types of things that may have gone on. They want a kind of audit of what this administration really was. And I think there are legitimate reasons for that. It's not only, pursuing somebody that you opposed. It's sending a message that this is just not hopefully going to happen again at quite this scale. And so I think, and it's not even entirely up to Biden. I mean, we have a system that's state by state. In the U.S., he can be prosecuted by a U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think it's an interesting question as of now for Americans to debate, and I think you'll see that, whether or not he should be prosecuted. We have a record of forgiveness of a kind. Richard Nixon committed crimes while in office and he was pardoned, and that was sort of intentional to be an act of healing, and how much difference it made wasn't clear. There's still a lot of people who are bitter about that episode in American life, which took place in the 70s, and who feel that, we should set a different example now. We should prosecute a person who may have committed crimes while in office. But I think that's going to be quite a tense debate that will start kicking off right around now.
Thank you so much to all of you for speaking to us. My colleague in our New York office, Joe and Bryce Pease, and Eusebius Makaiza, who is a political analyst and also author and American journalist. Thank you very much to you, Eve Fairbanks. That's how we come to the end of that discussion.